The vast majority of the people that say they're Jews, that's the level of Judaism they follow. There's some that are Orthodox. There's some that are Messianic. There's many denominations of Jews. There's many denominations of Christians and Catholics and people of the book, many different denominations of Muslims. All of these are being weaponized and galvanized in their own forms and facets to try to wage these infantadas, these holy wars against each other, to be pitted against each other and have these horrific conflicts to burn and exhaust the world out of religion so that they will ultimately embrace utopianism and Luciferianism and the fallen, the return of the Rephaim, the councils of the Nephilim, that they would embrace these gods that will descend from above and masquerade like Jesus and masquerade like the angels when they're the ones bringing the most tyrannical overlords regime that the world could ever imagine.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thank you so very much for tuning in. That was my friend and author, Nathan Reynolds. He escaped his Illuminati family, the Reynolds family, after years of being basically tortured as a child and turned into a child assassin. And he's here to help me unpack the question of Israel. Zionist Israel in World War III. As fate would have it, today, Friday, August 2nd, Greg Reese has released his new video titled Evangelical Zionists Pushing the World into Armageddon. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with Nathan. So my hat's off to Greg for having perfect timing with the release of that video, because it seems that many people in our own nation are bloodthirsty for World War III because they believe it will bring Jesus Christ back. And many of those same people will not stand up for the children being slaughtered in Gaza. So we'll dive into the deep end in this one and discuss the question of Jews, Israel, the House of Rothschild, the Talmud, the Torah, and who really are the Jews who now comprise the state of Israel. I'm so happy to have back on the show a biblical expert and a profoundly committed Christian, Nathan Reynolds. You know the website and the book, Snatched from the Flames, snatchedfromtheflames.com. Nathan, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back on, Sean.
How are you, brother?
I am living dangerously. Absolutely fantastic, though.
All right. Well, tonight's topic is a big one, and I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody better to address this topic than you from a historical perspective, but let me just start with some of the news of the day, just to sort of set the stage. The Bolshevik Revolution, y'all know what happened in that case. Millions of Christians slaughtered, and we can talk about who the culprits were behind the Bolshevik Revolution. But just in, Iran has raised the red flag of revenge on the dome, the Jamakaran Mosque. War is coming. This is from George Papadopoulos. Now, why would they do that? Well, Israel just bombed Lebanon and took out a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut. Now, evidently, this man was killed by a bomb placed in Tehran guest house 2 months ago in an astounding Mossad penetration of IRGC security, and the bomb was detonated remotely. Okay, that's just one of the many problems. Israel's genocide of Palestinian men, women, and children. First of all, I don't even know how to address this topic anymore, because for a long, long time, I've been saying the biggest problem is Zionism and the Rothschild control of the state of Israel. You know, we all know the history, the Balfour Declaration. But this is Jewish men explaining what the Talmud says about non-Jews. Quote, the non-Jews are animals, they are beasts. It is written, they exist to serve the Jews. They are not human. I'm going to play this. I'm going to sound it under. You guys can read the subtitles. And I'm going to turn this over to Nathan. Nathan, where do we start to address this topic fairly? Because I personally am offended to my soul at what I see happening in Gaza, as that is clearly a genocide. But supporters of Israel say, no, that's just Israel defending itself. Where do we begin on this mountainous topic of, I think the most importance to humanity right now is this topic?
First of all, Sean, I would say the most important thing to begin with is a credible factual understanding of a historical specificity of terms. Who are the Jews that you're addressing that are manifesting in front of us? First and foremost, where does the Zionistic format of the Jews as we see them in the ideological pursuits, where are those things birthed out of? Before I think we can ever have really any success in being able to understand any of this, you've got to be able to look back through history in time and be able to understand, where do these people come from? First and foremost, I come from a family of clandestine operators, those people that operated from the shadows, masquerading in all kinds of various different forms and ideologies, people that were serpent cult worshipers. They would shapeshift themselves to adapt to the environment in order to be able to advance a hidden agenda. The hidden agenda for them was the rise of Luciferianism. Luciferianism being a different thing than what we're talking about more specifically with what the Jewish ideology is, or Zionistic ideology is, or the synagogue of Satan, and the merging between these things. Satanism is distinct and separate from the ideological doctrinal pursuits of a Luciferian, which is different from the Zionists. However, many of these organizations like that within the vassal agents of the Pope and the Black Robe priests, the Jesuits, they have this common goal, which is the willingness to work together in subterfuge and treasonous tactics to mutilate, lie, cheat, steal, desecrate, destroy, and wage psychological warfare operations to manipulate the masses through media, propaganda, through entrapment, blackmail, extortion, in order to advance their secret hidden hand agendas. That lens with which I viewed the world growing up gave me a really quick understanding that people are liars. Vast majority of them are liars. So how are we going to ascertain what is the truth? Well, I think preeminent among that is going to be what is discipline, and is going to be a love for the truth and a willingness to find firsthand source documents in order to be able to gain an understanding from the timepiece of the vault of history of where all these things come from. So first things first, a clarification of terms that's going to be very beneficial is who are Jews? By definition, the word Jews does not appear in the scriptures, in the historical text of the scriptures, until the book of Esther. Timeline chronologically, really important, just working piece. I know some of you may be familiar with the scriptures. By the way, I'm using that term specifically. It's a translation that's also very beneficial. If you've never heard of it, it's a great translation. I highly recommend it for whatever it's worth. Those of you that want to read the scriptures for yourself, understand that in the book of Esther is actually the first time where this word Jews is referenced. The letters J-E-W do not exist in Hebrew, nor did they exist in the English language for much later on in time. And so this word that we translate that day is Yahudi. Yahudi. They would be people that were associated with descendants from the tribe of Judah, as we would use it in English, or Yahuda, as it's actually written out in the Hebrew. Yahudim would be the plural way of saying that. That's one of 12 tribes of the sons that were born to Yaakov, Jacob. He had 12 sons. He later had adopted the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, as his own sons. So this is why you'll see almost 13 tribes discussed at times, because Ephraim and Manasseh were sons of Joseph, and they're talked about as the house of Israel later on in scripture. The house of Israel and the house of Judah become divided during the reign of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. During that time, the tribes split off. There's rebellion. They were unified under King David. They were unified under King Solomon. But after that, Rehoboam, he exercised excruciating taxes against the rest of Israel. The sons of Israel rebelled against him, and they followed Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the leader of the house of Israel. The house of Israel is the other tribes, generally 10 tribes, because Benjamin clung to Judah, Yehuda. Those two tribes were the southern kingdom in Jerusalem and Judea. The rest of the tribes were spread out over the rest of the promised land. Over time, as they turned and began to follow pagan idolatry and began to mix in worshiping other mighty ones, worshiping other gods, sacrificing their babies in the fires to Moloch, worshiping the Baalim, and following the practices of the mystic, the mystery religions, worshiping and bowing down to these other gods and worshiping in ways that the Father had specifically said, don't go do that. Don't give into idolatry. Don't go take my name and smear it and brand it on all kinds of things that it doesn't belong to. Don't bring my name to nothing. These later became doctrinal pursuits that were mandated by the kings on the children of Israel and on the children of Judah that they had to follow in order to be a part of the kingdom. They literally forced them to break the Torah. The Torah is the loving instructions of Yahuwah. It's often referenced as the first 5 books of the scriptures: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's what people will call the Torah. But the word Torah is not the word law as we would see it in a Greco-Roman mindset. It's literally the writings, the instructions. That's how somebody would view it historically. So over time, you had this house of Israel go into this debasement of debauchery, ultimately to where the king of Assyria is brought in and takes captive the house of Israel, scatters the tribes to the 4 corners of the nations, captures them, and disseminates the rest of the tribes of Israel all across the world. The house of Judah was spared that judgment for a season. There was times where there was repentance and turning away from it, but then later on they fell away and they again embraced it, especially under the king's son, Hezekiah. His son's name was Manasseh. He did more evil than all the kings before him, including worse than all the Canaanites, the Perizzites, all the sons of the Nephilim, the Rephaim people in Sodom, Gomorrah, and the cities of the plains. They were doing worse abominations than all those people before them under the house of Judah. And it said one of the defining characteristics, and this is important, was that those people, they made their kings participate in evil, the sons of Yehuda. Whereas the sons of Israel followed their king's command to do all this wickedness and abomination. But the sons of Yehuda specifically gave into the worst levels of depravity and demanded their rulers to do the same. Well, this led to King Nebuchadnezzar being raised up by Yahuwah to come in, capture Jerusalem, take captive all of the people, bring to the ground the temple of Solomon that was built in his days, to ruin the people and to leave a remnant there of the poor as stewards of the land. Jeremiah also was one of the people that stayed behind. People like this leads you into the time of captivity during the time of Daniel, and Daniel is a really important figure during that time frame. Isaiah, Jeremiah, these other prophets were writing about this and living contemporaneous to these events. It was after 70 years of captivity in Babylon and during the time of Babylon, while they're living there, that the Jewish people, the Yahudim, began to try to preserve their way of life. They began to repent and turn back to the Father. However, while they were there over 70 years, the generation that once lived in the land grew old and waxed old, and many of them died, and the traditions and the scriptures were lost to them, and they began to assimilate with Babylonians. The religion that they assimilated with became Babylonian mysticism. This is the mystery religions. This is the things that we can trace back to Shinar, to Nimrod, and ultimately back to the sons of Cain, Enoch the evil, and the priest class of the fallen ones. That priest class, the mystery religions that we see in Egypt, the Book of the Dead, like we talked about last time and read from the Book of the Dead and the Book of Ra, and the cannibalistic cults, those things got picked up and assimilated with the scriptures, the Torah, and they began to pass on an oral tradition of these traditions of the elders, like you'll see later on in scriptures, where the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua, is contending against this priest class that has instituted the traditions of man that they have inherited from Babylonian mysticism and mixed in that with Kabbalah, Talmud, right? These are the things that began to infiltrate this. It is during that time, shortly thereafter, that Nehemiah is under the Medo-Greeks, the Medo-Persian Empire, is given favor and is financing under Cyrus the Great, is financed to go rebuild the temple. When they rebuild the temple, him and Ezra try to call the people back to the original scriptures and say, we need to follow these things. But some of the people that came back to the land followed this Jewish, literally the first time it shows up, the Jewish traditions. This is not Yahudim. This is Jews, distinct categories, sons that go back in lineage to a different line other than the sons of Seth, many of whom are sons of Japheth, a different son of Noah. Imperative understanding to know who it is we're specifically talking about and where the etymology of their beliefs come from. That process of an amalgamation between mystery religions and biblical ideologies and biblical doctrine created what we would call today the Jews. The Jews, by and far, are a ideological people group that do not explicitly adhere to the scriptures and what's written in there. Some of them, I'm being a little broad in generalization. I understand some of them are preservers of the word. However, many of them have been influenced by the traditions of man, the oral teachings of man that were then codified and ratified into collections of writings that then we see people that are practicing Talmud, like you're quoting and referencing later on. These are the things that are used in a lot of the Jewish traditional practices of today. They built fences around the Torah, the instructions. They built additional fences around it that were man-made doctrines. They were doctrines and traditions of men. They had nothing to do with the word. They were founded from these preserved traditions. That is who the Messiah so fiercely contended with when he showed up, was this Pharisaical priest class of people that bought their way in, bribed, cheat, stole, and murdered their way into the seats of power, into the priest class, murdered off the sons of Zadok, who had the priesthood, who the ones who had the divine, the actual right and the ordination, all the way from the sons of Aaron, all the way going back, who had the right to be in the temple. They persecuted them and utterly drove them into the wilderness, into a place where later the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Not the Essenes. That's not who was occupying that area. The Essenes were a mystic cult of homosexuals who lived south of the lands where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. That is not the Essenes. They were the sons of Zadok. There's a channel out there called The God Culture, who does a great breakdown series. For those of you that are interested, tuck it away, breaking down who are the priests of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those are the oldest firsthand sources that we can go to attest whether or not the history of translation is consistent or inaccurate of the text that we use to evaluate the scriptures. The Dead Sea Scrolls unlocked for a lot of us an area that's called textual criticism, where we can compare text and manuscripts from AD 400, AD 1400 to 200 BC, 300 BC, 600 BC, and see whether or not there's inconsistencies based off of who held the text. And what happened is, on some of our manuscripts, there was this other group of individuals who were practicing Babylonian Jews who operated under the guise of this other mystery religion, who made amendments and alterations to what books were allowed to be canonized or brought into the scriptures, and which ones pointed to prophetic fulfillments of the Messiah, and which ones they could obfuscate and confuse in order to try to hide the Messiah as Yeshua of Nazareth. They obviously have a different agenda in mind to preserve that and keep that from that. So I give you that historical lens piece of understanding so that first and foremost, we can be careful when entering into this conversation to know, are we talking about Jews? Are we talking about sons of Judah? Or are we talking about children of Israel, followers of the scriptures? Or are we talking about masquerading mystery religions and synagogue of Satan, these shape-shifting cult followers who are willing to do all of these horrific evils like you're describing later on? Those are the fruits of people that are serving a very different mighty one, a very different God than the one that we read about in the scriptures, the one that is the creator of the heavens and the earth, Yod-He, Vav-He, like you saw written earlier by that scholar who was posting that. That's really important for us to be able to have a textual historical lens in order for us to have this conversation and go forward and jump into the 18th century, the 17th century, even the 20th century, of where the formulation of the state of Israel, the Zionistic state of Israel, and who were some of the players behind the scenes in the early 1800s that were instituting and sparking secret societies and financing it, whether it's the lords of the Rothschilds, but also before that, and Moses Hess and some of these other cult leaders that were trying to create a Jewish Zionistic state in order to foment these types of wars to crush and annihilate biblical people.
Yeah, thanks for that, because, Charlotte Iserbyt has written about the deliberate dumbing down of America. And believe me, I'm punching above my weight class to try to even have this conversation with you. But I have enough humility to know that when people leave in the comments below on BitChute all the time, Sean won't name the Jew, or even guests that I've had on say, it's the Jews, Jew, Jew, Jew. I have enough humility to know I don't know the history that you just laid out to be able to jump onto that bandwagon. I think that's way too easy. So let me ask you a really simple question. Based on the knowledge you just shared with us, who are the Rothschilds I consider that to be the Khazarian mafia. And they're the ones that instituted the state of Israel on May 14th, 1948, after the cooperation of the British government or the royals in the Balfour Declaration. So they got the state of Israel re-implemented, or implemented, I should say, implemented in 1948. And previous to that, it's my understanding that people who called themselves Jews lived side by side in the Palestinian area in Palestine, lived side by side with Palestinians and Christians, and they all lived peacefully together for hundreds of years. So who are the Rothschilds and who is in Israel today? My understanding, again, I don't know the whole history here, but my understanding is if you can prove you are a Jew, you can go live in Israel and you get all sorts of free stuff. So come on over to Israel, Jews, come on home. What is the real story? What's going on here? Because I see one nation state on planet Earth, aside from the United States, because we just love our endless wars, but one nation state seems not to be able to get along with anybody else on planet Earth, and that's Israel. So what are we dealing with here?
Just on one side note, for those of you that are interested in some reference material, who would, like Sean said, who are honest enough with themselves and others to know that they are ignorant of a topic. Humility is a prerequisite for good learning. I am not the expert on these arenas in that regard. I'm a quick study of people that, and I'm a good finder of really excellent sources. I have two people I would preeminently recommend for those of you that want to study this out at great depth in an incredible broad spectrum, as well as microcosm evaluations of the issue at hand. First and foremost, the history that I'm giving you from the chronological historical perspective in the biblicity of the world, as well as like archaeologically, is a gal named Stephanie Green, Greene. She has a podcast that's called the Promise Perspective Podcast, and she has a season in there which goes through the scriptures and historical timeline from Genesis all the way towards the end, and where these people, traditions, and ideologies came from that we inherited along the way. What is the history of it? She does a very thorough, methodical job of walking somebody through that. I highly recommend it. Go and check it out. The other person that I'm going to borrow lots of his material from, and somebody that I've tutelaged under and mentored under for many years, is a guy named Richard Grove, who has the Grand Theft World podcast, and something on there that's it's an incredible project that he's put together, which is archiving all these historical pinpoints of history along the way. In that, he has done since about October in particularity, he has devoted much of his research. He's a forensic historian, an incredible scholar of scholars, and an individual who helps train people on logic, rhetoric, and grammar, in fundamental new education methodologies that most people didn't inherit in the schooling system they got. Anyways, he has a lot of breakdown on the historicity of events following the chain of custody all the way back in time to the records that we do have in modernity. So to answer your question of where the Rothschilds are, where do they come from? How do they fit into this? First and foremost, you're going to have to go for the scholar who's best suited for that. It's a guy named Johnny Cirucci, who I've mentioned many times on your show, and his book and his writings called The Secret History, which is phenomenal in understanding how the Roman Catholic Church and how these mystery religions have amalgamated and worked so diligently behind the scenes, that these Babylonian mystics and Jews, how they all came to be from that kind of historical lens piece. Phenomenal writings, highly recommended. He's got a lot of different books that are on there that you and I have talked about, from the Illuminati Unmasked to Eaters of Children, the Pedocracy Exposed. I apologize, I don't have my library with me to just sling all these out there for you guys, but I have a recommended reading section on my website at snatchedfromtheflames.com under resources, where you guys can see all these various texts and for yourself, and go ahead and dive down the rabbit hole of studying for the truth. But in order to go back chronologically to know where the Rothschilds came in, it's far before the Balfour Declaration in 1917 or 1919. It's far before the Balfour Declaration actually breaks into it. You can trace back in history back into the 1820s and newspaper articles that were written by a guy named the newspaper report is the Niles Weekly Register. The Niles Weekly Register had an article in there which discussed a purchase from the Sultan of Turkey for the greater Palestine area by the Rothschilds family, that they were in negotiations to purchase the Levant, Palestine, from the Sultan of Turkey. They were broke for cash. They were strapped for cash. They needed some money. The Rothschilds made an appeal to them that, hey, why don't we just let us buy Palestine, this whole region, from you? That goes back in time to 1829. There's a second corroborating newspaper article. Richard Grove has all of these trademarked and cataloged in his great history blueprint. You guys can check that out all you want. You could spend 10 years researching. Richard Grove popped up on my radar about 15 years ago, and I have been greatly blessed by that man's historical tenacity. But later on the timeline, you can trace up to 1841 when a man who is Lord Palmer, he and Lord Shaftesbury, they called for the restoration of the Jews to come into Palestine. That was kind of the first big time where people were starting to call for that. But the main figure that I think you should zoom in on the origin stories of where the Rothschilds came into a lot of this is a man named Moses Hess. And he wrote a book. He's the father and the founder of the Utopian Society. Okay. These were people that like you and I have referenced in this book, The Game of Gods. Carl Teichripp does a very good historical examination through history of where these universalism, this utopianism, the United Nations agenda, the Council on Foreign Relations agenda, like where do these green agenda, the trans agenda, where do all these things come from? He does a great job breaking through there. But paralleled and running alongside there is a man named Moses Hess, who is the founder of that utopian societal approach, that we could force mankind to conform to this model where everyone, if could own nothing, it'd be happy. This is like the overarching ideas of a lot of the social Darwinian evolution utopianism. He's the founder of that. Well, he put out a book later on that is called it's called Rome and Jerusalem, The Last Nationalist Question. That book, in which was published in 1862, he names the names of individuals who were colluding with him and his secret society to infiltrate Freemasonic lodges, as well as other secret societies, in which he also names the characters of individuals who are the double and triple agents who are going to advance the agenda of bringing about a Zionistic state. They wanted to bring about the Jews coming back to Palestine, and they wanted to partner with the Rothschilds, specifically named, in order to accomplish that agenda. They stated they had already done this. He stated clearly that they had already successfully moved the coffers of society in behind the scenes with the movers and the shakers, that in order to bring this to fruition. Okay, that's a key one. Rothschild, and Baron Hesch is the other guy who is specifically named as the secret society aficionado, who's working his way into these different cults in order to go ahead and work on that. Later on, when you jump into the 1870s and 1880s, when the czars get killed in Russia, this is the first time that a lot of the persecution for the Jews begins to take place, and pilgrimages begin to happen into the Levant, into Palestine. As that begins to take place, it's setting the stage for cultural classes. But that's the timeline that you were referencing earlier, Sean, where there was a lot of people who were getting along much more amiably. And that's because it was under a different lordship up until this point in history. However, it's the French and the English, the two Rothschilds. One is Walter de Rothschild, and the other one is Edmund de Rothschild. And it's in 1860. There's another book for reference here you guys can tuck away, which is called Two Rothschilds and the Land of Israel, which was written by Simon Schama in 1978. And he goes in and chronicles the zooming in of the history where the French de Rothschild, his name is Edmund de Rothschild, and Walter de Rothschild are working together to go ahead and work on the Balfour Declaration, the actual terrain mapping and piecemealing out of the Levant into who's going to get which territory, who's going to get their names on the maps, who's going to control these different regions. The French family side of the Rothschilds and the English side of the Rothschilds had different pieces of the pie, of the apartheid pie, that they wanted to divide up. The Rothschild family is also the people who are responsible for South Africa's apartheid system. This goes back into a similar timepiece that we could go into on the Diamond Empires, all of the different echoes of what happens with De Beers and how they took a loan from the Rothschilds and just plundered South Africa gold and silver and diamonds on a huge way and created the empire of apartheid to finance and set that all up. That became through Rothschild's money. And they are the ones who set up the Holocaust system in South Africa, who then were later responsible for up into modernity towards the late 19 or the early 1900s, the Balfour Declaration, which is all historical, reliable text we can sort from their websites. That website has since changed. And even when you and I, Sean, did this discussion a year and a half ago, they have updated their website to change some of the historical timeline to try to obfuscate some of this on the Rothschild's official timeline of history. However, those are first-hand source documents that you guys can look into. One I missed in there, which is published by the University of Hebrew, the Hebrew University, which is called The Rothschilds and Early Colonization of Palestine by Ran Aronson. The title has since been obfuscated on the cover. If you go to pick up the book or you go to try to buy the book for yourself, it's going to be called Rothschilds and Early Colonization. If you open it, it will say the early colonization of Palestine. But that's because the historical narrative has changed by the serpent eaters because they want to be able to obfuscate the real history of Palestinians and try to deny that they exist and wherever existing and all the rest of it. But that should give you a better lens piece to jumpstart your understanding of who are the Rothschilds, where do they fit into this. They are one of the other string pullers for the secret societies, financiers of the secret societies, who are willing to work with people that will compromise and keep people out of it. The Khazarian Jews and the people that come from the Kazakhs region, that's one of the peoples that followed by belief, not by blood, by belief, this doctrinal religion of being able to follow these adept practices and pursue mixing of the scriptures with other ones. I know that's somewhat broad, and I know some of you are going to have a hard pill to swallow that, but the blood test that you're getting in order to verify that you're a Jew does not tie you to the sons of Abraham. It does not tie you to the lineage of that heraldry. If you want to find out heraldry, you're not going to find it through a blood test. You're going to find it through what's called heraldic proofing. This is where my families come from, and deep historical people that want to make claims to thrones, they have to meet with genealogists. They go through the books of names and the ancestries. It is not done through simple blood tests because the vast majority of that is controlled and catered to specific financiers who want to do this. It is not legal for the vast majority of people in Jerusalem, in Judea today, for them to have blood tests done on them because it doesn't show that they're ancestors of these people at all. It shows that they come from a totally different region, from a totally different descendants than those that are, like you said previously, the actual occupiers of the territory. Many of the sons of the house of Israel that were scattered to the nation, the other tribes, many of them are here in the Americas. Many of them are scattered into places like Japan. You're going to find that the lost tribes of the house of Israel all over the world. You will also find the sons of Judah all over the world. They weren't concentrated in one little pocket. Many of them were living in that land to this day. Those people were Arabs. Arabs. That's where we get these words from. Saudi Arabia is a misnomer. Saudi is one of the families who lives in that region, who the United States, through their own dealings with, brokered a deal that said, you give us the oil, you trade it in US dollars, we'll give you the army to protect you, and we'll call it Saudi Arabia. So everyone will think that this whole region is you guys. This is all modern word language of a bunch of Satanists, people that are twisting with their words. A Satanist is a term of a legal prosecutor in the state of Israel. That's literally what the prosecuting attorney is called, Hasatan, the accuser. So these people play these language games, and if you're not really careful to hold them to a paper and light their feet on fire and be like, what does their book say? Another guy who does a good job of that is Gary Wayne. If you want to study heraldry and where these people come from, his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of the Giants Plan to Enslave Humanity. He has a new one that's out that goes through this in a better piece. But these are great reference materials for those of you that want to find out more.
Man. By the way, we're going to have to split this into two parts. This is such a big topic. We're not going to get to Noahide laws tonight. I wanted to do that. I want to ask you about the Geneva Bible versus the King James Bible, but I want to show you this. Torah versus Talmud. Are there Jews that just embrace and love and live by the Torah versus Talmudic Jews? Because I'll let people read this. I'll sound it under. Their suffering will be equal to that of the cursed one, Jesus. The Talmud says that the founder of Christianity has been sentenced to boil in feces. I won't read the rest. So, Torah versus Talmudic Jews. You mentioned the book Eaters of Children. Why have the Jews been kicked out of 109 countries throughout history?
Well, I think the challenge, Sean, is trying to differentiate. I don't speak the specific Hebrew or the language that a lot of these people speak. I can read a fair bit of it, but I can't ascertain for certain that this is the accurate translation of what these people are even saying. This is kind of clip theology. You know what I'm saying? I can't verify the claims of what's being referenced in some of these. I can on the ones of where these Jews have been kicked out of in places like that, similar to the Jesuits and where they've been kicked out of. We have covert agents that are willing to lie and manipulate and cheat and steal and not follow the Torah whatsoever, which says don't bear false witness, don't murder, don't steal, don't do all these specific things, because if you do them, the fruits of your life are going to produce rebellion, hatred, persecution, murder, violence, envy, strife. You're warned against doing these things, and loving your neighbor is preeminent. We're supposed to love Yahuwah, our Elohim, with all our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength, and all of our will, our desire. And then we're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. On these things, all of the commandments, the instructions hang like a yoke. If you're trying to carry all the water back to the village, you need to balance loving your neighbor and loving Yahuwah. And he tells you how to do that in the scriptures. But if you're ignorant and you're raised in modern Christianity, like most of us are, we're told to not even pay attention to the front 2/3 of the book, that it's just for these people called the Jews, which is totally erroneous. The Jews are not who that book is written for. The Jews don't exist in that book until later on. They're mentioned. They're popping up in the times of Esther after Babylonian captivity. That book is not for the Jews. That book is for all mankind. It's the history of Yahuwah and his story of redemption to his people and his plan on how to get us back into covenant with him. It's a powerful, incredible, wonderful story that if you should read for yourself, if you've never done it, from Genesis to Revelation in the chronological order. What's really hard, and we should just touch on it a little bit, about the King James Version and some of these other Bibles that we inherited, we do have a lot of difficulty in ferreting out chronologically what happened when, because people put books in different order than the timeline should have dictated, because it makes it very confusing to follow the story if you read it out of order. But if you put it back into its right order, it's very beneficial and it's much easier to understand and to read. That the scriptures translation that I'm referencing there is one of those that's restored the names, because most people got a Bible that says God and Lord, not understanding that that's following the Talmudic practice of blotting out the name, of hiding the name of Yahuwah. That tradition is rooted in Babylonian sacred secret. We don't want anybody to use the name of Yahweh or Yahuwah offensively or as a way of mocking us because we're saying it. So during the captivity in Babylon, they created a doctrine that said no one's allowed to say the name. We will call him Adonai. We will call him Master. We'll call him Lord. Lord is literally the word Baal. It's like literally the same titles they gave to the Baalim, these other mighty ones, these other gods. That all came as a transition from traditions of men to hide the name. Everybody that's doing that is bringing the name to vanity. Yahuwah said, my name is Yahuwah. This is the name you call upon. Call on me and I will answer you in your day of distress. The Jewish tradition is to blot out that name. They've used many different agents along the way to help advance that campaign, from the Shakers of the Spear Society under Francis Bacon back with King James and the introduction of Freemasonic rites and rituals into Scotland, into Great Britain, all the way into many of the intentional mistranslations that we got in our scriptures. There's genuine, I love the word, I love the scriptures. I believe that we don't have a reliable, precisely accurate English translation of the text. In the text and the main core tenets of the scripture have been preserved over time, but we have a lot of lying pens of the scribes that jump in there and they make deletions or additions to change the narrative and the story to fit the current times of whoever their financiers are. That could be the Rothschilds, that could be old King Jimmy, and so they changed the name of the book of Yaakov, which is the book of James as we read it today, to match the name of the king, so the king will continue to finance the translation that they're doing. The Tyndale Bible, these other Bibles, this is all really referenced and documented well in The Secret History by Johnny Cirucci. Those translations and those things that people were being burned at the stake in the Inquisition, people that preserved the Hebrew scriptures, that kept the feast days, that guarded the Sabbath, people that were hunted down and persecuted by the Jews and by the Catholics and by the Jesuits all over the world, were those that kept and preserved the ways of the scripture and followed it. The reason our Messiah was executed so horrifically was because he hated what these disgusting perverts were doing with the word. They were perverting truth. They were mixing the clean and the unclean together. They were profaning it, and they were teaching people to do wickedness. The Father utterly abhors that stuff, and he will send judgment to deal that job out.
You know, what strikes me, and I wanted to ask you, let me ask you first before I get off track here. What Bible do you use? What Bible?
I use a lot of Bibles.
What is the best Bible for our listeners? I don't think it's the King James.
I put out
for a long time.
I put out, just so you guys know, on my website, I did an entire audio recording of this in this nice microphone, read in a moderately dramatic and intense voice, right? I put out the entirety of the scriptures. This is called the scriptures. The word Bible is a whole other etymological nightmare to jump into. The scriptures is what it had been called for a long time. This is called the scriptures. It's put out by the Scripture Institute for Scriptures Research. This is the one that I used most often. However, I love it. I absolutely love it. I read it from Genesis to Revelation. So those of you that are more audio content people, you could have access to it. It's free for a download on my website. I don't charge anything for this. Freely I received this stuff. Dude, I am the chief of the sinners. I am the worst of the worst. I'm the greatest abomination of mankind. I've done the greatest evil that there ever could be. And you know what? I freely was given life and an opportunity to change my life, change my family's future. And I tried to pursue that. And so I laid down my life to try to put this word out, because to me, this is what changed my life. Understanding and reading this book for myself instead of going to priests and pastors and popes and politicians masquerading in psychological pep talk people to try to tell me what to believe about the scriptures. I just encourage people, don't trust what I have to say. Go test it out for yourself. If it has veracity and it's found to be truthful, fantastic. If not, throw it over your shoulder and move on. But you should know what the scripture has to say for itself, rather than to render an opinion based off of whatever's masquerading as Israel, masquerading as Christians, masquerading as Jews around you. You should know for yourself, who are the people of the Most High, and what does he want for us to do in a relationship with him, and what does he want to do in a relationship with our neighbors. That's all plainly written from Genesis to Revelation. You can find out for yourself. That's the translation I use when I'm studying. Really important. I open up multiple different historical examinations of languages, like Ernest Klein's Etymological Dictionary of the Hebrew Language for English Readers. That's the definition dictionary I turn to find out the meaning of the word over time. There's other resources I use, whether it's the Strong's Concordance, Hebrew lexicons, Greek lexicons, Strong's Interlinear. There's a lot of different tools that I use to study, and I look at 10, 20, 30 different translations in English to try to find out what is the most accurate rendering of this passage when I feel like there's some funkiness there. But if I don't read it for myself, if I don't get a better understanding for it, I'm always going to be taken captive by people to do whatever it is that their desire is, because you can weaponize this word. It's a two-edged sword. You know, like Sean, I'm always talking about blades. Single-edged sword, right? This is a Daniel Winkler, incredible knife, Winkler knives. They make purpose-built blades for wet workers and all kinds of field workers and people that do all kinds of sketchy stuff in the darkness. These blades are very well balanced and engineered to fit in someone's hand in all kinds of different positions and grip. This is the best grip for actually doing massive cavitation wound damage on people, right? Or on animals, if that's more comfortable for some of you. Think of it as a butcher's tool. When you put your hand into this position, right, and you angle down and you want to rip from a sternal notch to the scrotum, this is the way that you do that. You don't do these little slashing tools. You don't do these little like tiny cuts. These all have a usefulness and a function for it. But this thing in the hands of a trained individual is a completely different tool than what most people are going to go to the store and buy off the shelf for $20 online. Even the very sheath itself, right? This is a leather coated inside and outside, a silent draw sheath. That's so people can't hear you drawing your blade when you're sneaking up on them and you're going to kill them. That's a really important little tool that most people would never know about. And they're like, oh, cool. It's leather. It's cute. It's fancy. It's a hunting knife. Sure. For people that want it to be that, that's what it's made for. Even the clip design and the sheath design, I have no affiliation with these people whatsoever. I don't have any reciprocity, sponsorship deals, advertisements. I don't accept any of it. I don't monetize any of my content. Y'all, if I'm making a recommendation about something, it's because it came from blood, sweat, tears, and swequity and endorsements. Nothing from those people directly. That blade was made with a very specific purpose, with a very specific people in mind, by an incredibly talented individual. The scriptures was written by the absolute words of our Messiah and the Most High, the word of Elohim that's trustworthy, valid, testable. Test it for yourself, examine it through history. This thing can be used to bring people to freedom. This can also be used to burn the world down. I have never used this knife to harm another individual. I have killed and executed many animals with this knife to butcher them. It serves great purposes, but the vast majority of time, this is a tool that I use to add value to life. Open boxes and processed chips and fruit. This is what I use it for. However, this tool can be used when needed to utterly destroy and eviscerate enemies. That's what the scriptures are. That's what history is. If you are wanting to lie and cheat and steal, you can use it to do all those things. But my contention is you should know it for yourself so you can test these things and find out whether or not they're true.
Wet workers. I knew the minute you said it, wet workers. A lot of people don't know what wet work is, but that's essentially the business of assassination, correct?
That would be killing people.
Yeah.
Killing people, not necessarily always assassination. That tends to be more covert killing of people. But yeah, wet working is using different types of methodologies to kill somebody, generally with a blade. That's the art of silent killing. That was my specialty inside that world. I like to turn off all the lights and then hunt people in scary ways. That was what I did. So I like blades and different kinds of tiny little blades. Like the one I make has these specific types of handholds and grips, chili pepper handles and these grips so that it doesn't drop out of my hand and when I'm all wet and soaking wet and it's gross out there.
Hang on, let me jump in, because for the audience who doesn't know and maybe who have not seen our previous recordings and don't understand your background, we should tell people that you were indoctrinated into essentially a Luciferian Illuminati family, the Reynolds family, and you were taught at a very young age to do terrible things because terrible things were done to you. You were a victim of these people. And so I just want people to know you have changed your life because of Jesus Christ, because of Yahweh. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So when you mention that other life you have, it is as foreign to you as it's as big a difference as there is between heaven and hell. The life you have today versus the life you were trapped into, the life you were born into. You were a changed man because of the Lord Jesus Christ, because of Yahweh. And I think it's very powerful. I wanted to say that because for any new listeners who hear you going on the tangents about wet work, it sounds pretty scary. You sound like a scary guy, and I don't see you that way at all. I see you as one of the smartest people I know. And we're going to do a part 2 on this conversation, guys, because we've just scratched the surface. I want to talk about Noahide laws. I mean, I could show you what Google says they are, but then I can show you what Twitter and some of the more experts on this topic say they are. And it's all quite terrifying as this one tiny nation state seems to wield the power of the world at its fingertips. I mean, I really feel like we're on the precipice of World War III, largely because of the state of Israel. And of course, maybe the horror Babylon itself, the U.S. criminal federal government in Washington, D.C. This is the website, snatchedfromtheflames.com. Support the author, buy the book. It's easy to find on here. The site looks beautiful, by the way. You've redone it. And before we go, I want to ask you about your lovely wife, who I know had fallen very ill. Is she doing better since we last spoke?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for asking, Sean. She is in a lot of ways doing significantly better. So we're rejoicing on that. And, that's what the story is about, me experiencing love, authentic love that didn't have presuppositions and disgusting things behind it. And the moment I met her and that's to today, that if you click that, the About Us, you'll see a little bit more of our story and my family and this incredible life and the journey that the Father's given me. I had a life of great darkness and radical evil growing up, but you know what? I would have rather gone through the hell that I did early on in my life to have a much more satisfying and fulfilling life today. That by breaking that covenant, by coming out of the covenant that I had with death and choosing to instead have a covenant with the Most High, I've been able to experience life to its fullest. And that started with that woman giving me my first ever experience of unconditional love, loving me as a wounded, disgustingly broken, desperately hurting soldier. She was the hands of Messiah to my body that was very bruised and battered. And she still is. I'm not an easy man to be with. I'm not an easy person to love. I'm a really easy person to like, but to live with me day in and day out, there's a lot of complexities. I have a lot of baggage that I've carried around because of the life that I lived and because of the things that were done to me. But you know what? I am getting to experience the fullness of joy of a new life and a new meaning and a new destiny because she has labored down in the trenches with me for 14 years and has loved on me and shown me what it's like to have a co-laborer, a shield bearer to fight in this war of the ages at my side. And you know what? I am blessed exceedingly. The Father's blessed us now with a large family, with big children, with children coming out my ears, man. It's been wonderful. And the hardest thing I've ever gone through is becoming a parent and trying to put aside these things of my past and not always try to be the war general in the corner, trying to fight for the nations and trying to set captives free, but to also just understand that I've got to just fight for my family and try to give them a better, full, and more fulfilled life.
Well, the final thing I'll say, and we can pick it up in part 2, but you tell me what you think about this. So Roseanne Barr is a Jew. My friend David Weiss is a Jew, but he says he was never a practicing Jew. He just happens to be told, I guess, that he's a Jew on his mother's side, but he's a great guy. I love him. And he found God. He found out about the Creator and turned to God after his work in the realm of this thing we live on. He believes it's not a globe. But I bring this up because as we round out the conversation, I think there's 2 statements, and we could pick it up with this in part 2. There's 2 statements that I think are equally extreme. The first statement is all Jews are the problem. And the second statement is the state of Israel is the United States' greatest ally. I think those are both really extremist statements, and I disagree with both of those statements. Do you think I have that right? We'll pick it up in part 2.
I think it would be well worth our time to break down those statements and just be able to understand it's better for us to be able to have a clear definition of terms when we have these conversations rather than to get pigeonholed and galvanized into different parties and if then only statements. If you're not with us, you are with the terrorists. Mm-hmm. These are magnificent weaponized warfare that is waged on people all the time. So I try not to make overly broad generalizations on any individuals because I know there's a lot of people that are simply just like there's lots of Catholics that don't follow the Knights of Mary. That's the original names of the Jesuits. They call it the Society of Jesus now because they had to rebrand. They're like, guys, we know you're all the knights for Ishtar. That's really not going to look good on the PR campaign. We're going to call you the Society of Jesus. It'll work way better long term. Okay, that's the rebranding stuff that we got to watch out for and be careful for. I don't want to try to junk to all the Jews into that, but the vast majority of them have inherited lies from their fathers. So did I, so did you, so did many of us. We were raised by the prison wardens. They wrote the history books. They raised us, and it's not because they were all malicious and evil and conniving. Many of them were just influenced by far better and more intelligent people at manipulating and controlling people, better managers and custodian class of people. Whereas the power brokers, the real family power brokers, sat behind the powerful shield of anonymity and reached through the curtain to puppet string these other players like families like the Rothschilds. But you have all kinds of different shot callers that are behind there. So I'm always really trying to be careful to make sure that people understand some of these are just non-traditionally practicing Jews. Some of these people are like, yeah, I just technically identify as a Jew because some ancestry.com thing said 23andMe said I'm a Jew, so I guess I'm a Jew. The vast majority of the people that say they're Jews, that's the level of Judaism they follow. There's some that are Orthodox. There's some that are Messianic. There's many denominations of Jews. There's many denominations of Christians and Catholics and people of the book, many different denominations of Muslims. All of these are being weaponized and galvanized in their own forms and facets to try to wage these infantadas, these holy wars against each other, to be pitted against each other and have these horrific conflicts to burn and exhaust the world out of religion so that they will ultimately embrace utopianism and Luciferianism and the fallen, the return of the Rephaim, the councils of the Nephilim, that they would embrace these gods that will descend from above and masquerade like Jesus and masquerade like the angels when they're the ones bringing the most tyrannical overlords regime that the world could ever imagine.
Mm. I like to say we're in the midst of the Great Awakening. I don't think I'm naive entirely to be saying that, but until everybody knows this true history of some of the things we've covered here, and it takes a long time to do that. Nathan has done the work. Just a few of the books: Johnny Cirucci's The Secret History, Eaters of Children. Who wrote that one? Eaters of Children.
The Pedocracy Exposed, that is written by Johnny Cirucci as well.
Okay. Game of Gods. Who wrote that one?
Carl Teicherib. That's this book right here. Carl Teicherib. The Game of Gods.
Amazing. All right.
I'll slow that down.
Yeah, I knew you'd be able to handle this topic better than just about anybody I know to bring on. So I want to thank you for tackling it with me tonight. It's a deep, at 1 hour. I mean, my goodness, what a joke. I even mumbled to myself as I was jumping on Zoom to meet you. I'm like, Sean, why don't you bite off a bigger topic to try to cover in 1 hour? Give me a break. All right, brother. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I will leave a link to your website below. And if nothing else, guys, if you don't want to buy the book and support the author, you can listen to the audio scriptures read by Nathan Reynolds for free on his website, snatchedfromtheflames.com. The link is below.
The audio of the book is also available. Name your own price for a digital copy of the book, and an audio version is available of the book is all there. But please check out that recommended reading section. The reference materials, there's stuff for homeschooling, there's stuff for regenerative agriculture, there's stuff for an entire different historical examination of history if you'd like that as well.
All right. Amen. Thank you, brother. We appreciate you. And we'll get you scheduled for part 2.